This is actually when I tried to watch this. This kicks off at a scene that was censored on YouTube via the website that I was watching before. And this is one of my favorite roles of actor Conrad Brooks, in which he plays the homosexual approaching the transvestite Glen or Glenda in Ed Wood's film Glen or Glenda. And, he like I said, this is kind of a politically incorrect type of scene on account of the fact that Edward D. Wood Jr. throughout his life and film career, and at least in this particular movie, made the distinct difference between uh, you know being a homosexual and a transvestite. So in this case, he refers to the homosexual in a rather predatory light and stomps out the cigarette and storms off of the screen. Now we're back to the industrial stock footage that Ed Wood is known for. But like I said, I just had to play over that scene first and foremost because I was waiting for it before, and it goes by so quickly, working on these commentaries, and then it's gone. But just so for the record, like I said, the politically correct atmosphere of today is censoring Ed Wood's films. And sooner or later, you just got to remind people of what it is, and you become kind of a caretaker of knowledge, imparting to the next generation as more and more things like this are kept hidden from the public. So anyway, here we've got the stock footage of the steel ores going in and out, and this is Ed Wood's strange commentary on civilization, where he has got a couple of guys talking about, transvestism, heterosexuality, and homosexuality, and all this other stuff, and one of them in Ed Wood's mind is actually a cross-dresser or someone who wants to be a woman, and it's kind of part of one of the funny and somewhat ridiculous things about Edward D. Wood Jr. as he makes this topical insight throughout this film. Now we're back to the Gothic horror mansion with Bela Lugosi in his role as more or less God, or the overseer. And a lot of those segments could easily have been, clipped off if he wanted to just go the documentary route. He could have gotten away with the psychiatrist. He goes overkill with two, in fact, overseers, narrators, giving us some insight into the action. Now, Ed Wood himself is rather good here as the starring actor of his own film, which was a very personal film for the time. And as we've come to laugh at it, we kind of undermine the seriousness of the issue he was facing. In which case, Wood was a compulsive transvestite. He was raised in girly clothing, which was somewhat ordinary for the time of where he grew up in Poughkeepsie, New York, where sometimes you wore your sister's dress, especially when you were a toddler, and parents thought it was cute or they didn't have anything, and obviously a baby likes to go to the bathroom, so it's easier to change a dress. This is the speech I most remember Wood for, where he's nearing into this famous dialogue, "My mind's in a muddle, like in a thick fog." And in this case, I think he's conferring with a best friend who in this film is also a transvestite. So, fitting in with the theme of Ed Wood seeing transvestites everywhere, or at least for the use of the story, somewhat unrealistic but hilarious, trait of the film. But although, given Ed Wood's entourage, it's not so strange to him. He kind of sought out that community. Notice the underlying tension that Wood displays in his role as Glen. He takes his part very seriously, and we know that from how he conferred with the makeup man when he turned down a more flattering brunette wig, and there's actually photographs of Wood wearing the brunette wig, looking more stunning and attractive, almost like you would, pick him up at a bar or something. But he distinctly chose the blonde wig so that you could tell that this was a man in woman's clothing. Wood also, I don't know if I discussed this before, he suffered an ailment during World War II called roundworms, which may have given his face some inflationary features. It caused him swelling at different places throughout his body, while in fact he actually has relatively tiny hands and he's not very tall. Here's his friend at home, wearing the women's clothing. My audio is off, so I'm just winging it from what I remember. I'm just at a calmer, little area of my life right now, so I was wanting to finish off this Glen or Glenda commentary. So I presume he's getting caught by his wife, and he didn't take the trouble to explain it to her before that he was in fact a transvestite. And notice the use of the movements here. Wood was a great director, and I think this is one that he really coached people on, to make that mummy hand where I implore you to listen to me. And he was, of course, a universal film buff. And this is actually the beginning of Edward D. Wood Jr.'s gothic horror career. And it's just a real treat to watch. I don't even know if we're going to go all the way to the end or not. We're just going to wing it for the rest of the night and see what goes and what have you. But here he is back in his alternate role as Glenda. It should be noted that in his written material for Glen or Glenda, the material gets substantially darker, and Glen becomes a hitman, and he's on death row, which is slightly alluded to. Similar scene is alluded to at the start of the picture. Here we are with Timothy Farrell a moment ago as the psychiatrist, and we're back to the real-time event in which the real man to female transsexual had just taken his life. And then, of course, now he's kissing Barbara, played by the beautiful Dolores Fuller, who doesn't really get a whole lot of justice in the Johnny Depp film, the Tim Burton biopic of Ed Wood. She was a very full-figured woman, and by full-figured, I definitely don't mean fat. I mean, by that I mean she's tall, she's well filled out, has big, strong cheekbones. But she was a blonde at a time when Hollywood was more infatuated with brunettes on account of the character of Lois Lane, probably. And Edward D. Wood Jr., in one of his next films, Bride of the Monster, actually recast her in a move that largely ended their relationship, because she was not only his lead actress for this film, but she was also a pinup model. She did some nice shots with Bela Lugosi. I might actually convert this commentary into a slideshow and commentary, so that maybe to save on some space for my poor computer. But yeah, this is a really great scene. She has kind of a hearty accent. It's not a normal actress voice. I mean, it's a little heavy, and I don't know if the review was true or not, saying that she had a face like a horse, but that might just as well be said of Sarah Jessica Parker, who portrayed her, as much as Dolores Fuller here, who actually has a rather lovely face. And she never smoked. She was extremely pleasant and helpful to Ed Wood, as she was to just, in fact, seemingly everyone around her. When they did the reunions, she popped up as kind of like the leader of the pack, the leader of the surviving Ed Wood entourage. And of course she had happily remarried by then and went on to record music with Elvis Presley in one of Elvis's last films, which in fact was kind of similar to an Ed Wood film, even though Ed didn't direct it. It was called Change of Habit, and it was a rather nice little film about Elvis as a doctor, and I really liked seeing Elvis as a doctor. It looked like it would have made a nice TV movie. Here's Lugosi in one of his great dialogues, taunting Ed Wood with the big green dragon speech. He eats little boys, puppy dog tails, and big fat snails. Yeah, I mean, I often imagine what this creature... Beware. Take care. Beware. Pull the strings. Yeah, that doesn't quite happen the same as like in the Tim Burton biopic, but they merge a lot of things together. Here's one of Ed's great nightmare sequences, and really he is the father... I don't know if you would say the father, but he had so many ideas which would lead to later modern horror films. So this is kind of like I don't know, I've never seen Louis Buñuel before, but there's also a movie called Carnival of Souls. And this reminds me maybe a little bit of some of that, and it's an eerie dream sequence, and Ed is going far out into, perhaps psychedelics before there was any psychedelics. I mean, it's kind of like how they imagined the hippies thought you had to use drugs to imagine everything, but sometimes if you just play around with the film stock and see what kind of different effects you can do, you end up with kind of these little trippy sequences, which are really quite nice. And Wood, surprisingly, is trying to express something very poignant here as to his confidence or lack of. I'm trying to look for the words here. His inadequacies towards Glenda, towards Barbara, and how strong he feels as Glenda, and how Glenda more or less haunts their relationship, and he might even sometimes hate her for rejecting him or her, and he's trying to be with her while he's also trying to be himself, which is also a her, and it's very complicated feelings of a real and genuine transvestite, which Ed Wood was. And if you speak to some of the people nowadays, different members of, I suppose, the gay community, for lack of a better term. This isn't necessarily Ed as a homosexual, because he apparently wasn't, but a lot of people who cross-dress and have say gender dysmorphia. I'm trying to be as respectful as I can while turning into these terms. Here he is, he's changing back into Glen in order to have the strength to lift the limbs off of Barbara, and it was a sequence that I largely misunderstood when I was talking about it before. I thought it even went the other way around, but he's flipping back and forth from different roles, and he's being tormented by this little demon. It's part of his personal demons. It could be alcohol or cross-dressing or whatever you have. I'm trying not to condemn or condone with regards to Ed's personal lifestyle, because there are many things which contributed to his decline, and towards the end of his life he wasn't the most pleasant person to be around, and he also kind of became somewhat jaded as a man. He was kind of stuck in the 50s and 60s in his last, comfort zone. And towards the end, even though he still watched a lot of the newer movies, I don't know if he totally blended in to the times in which he lived in. I don't know if he, but anyway, I'm assuming quite a lot. I used to think that this little demon guy was Bela Lugosi, but this is actually another actor whom we'll have to name maybe in the titles here. And there's this great duel between the master and overseer. Lugosi is more or less reprising his role as God, which ironically, when he was younger, he actually portrayed Jesus Christ in one of his earliest films, which I'm not sure is available anymore. And this is the greatest shot that Ed is known for. Puppy dog tails and big fat snails, and it reminds me very similar of what would later be done on A Nightmare on Elm Street, when Wes Craven got the idea to do the 1, 2, Freddy's coming for you. Here's an arbitrary bondage scene, and Lugosi plays it quite well and kind of amusing. At the end you get kind of like a vaudevillian tilt to his head, which is rather nice. I don't know if he was being told exactly what he was watching, but these are in fact real women for the men to enjoy while they're watching this movie about cross-dressing. I don't know if it was intended to really accomplish anything other than to see naked women in the middle of the transvestite film, and it's kind of an odd combination, because if you're a heterosexual man, you don't necessarily know if you're getting a real woman or a transvestite. But this is also one of Ed's greatest shots coming here. I think this whole clip might be gone off of YouTube even, because I don't know if they want to show the nudity or not without getting their content flagged, but you'll see the expressions that Ed is capable of, and Ed was really a great actor. And later on you see some more of his performance in a film called A Photographer's Love Feast, which I don't think I can go over because I don't have the rights to it. But this is a very full-figured woman, very wide hip, not bad looking at all, but she's doing a little strip tease in the middle of Ed Wood's transvestite film. And Bela Lugosi is watching like some powerful figure from beyond this world. This is even very similar to what Wood would revisit in Orgy of the Damned or Orgy of the Dead with Criswell in the place of Bela Lugosi. Although these are perhaps different overseers from beyond. Like, I would imagine Lugosi as a more benevolent force, kind of like Ed Wood's version. I don't like calling him God, but, he's more or less like the godlike figure of Glen or Glenda. Whereas Criswell is a more demonic presence in Orgy of the Dead. He's a character that lets women come back from the dead to dance for him for his own pleasure and amusement, and he's getting off to that, and he's killing people, sacrificing people, and trying to make them like him. Whereas Bela Lugosi is playing a more benevolent figure that actually saves people from their addictions, while he's also aware of everything that's happening in the world. So in a way, you're seeing a duel of entities, a duel of entities. In this case, the evil one is that little demon figure that creeps around Glen and Barbara at the wedding ceremony. Right now, we're seeing a little cat fight here, and this kind of goes on for ridiculous degrees, but it's very well done. I don't even know if Ed shot any of this, but he pieced it together very well with his own expressions and Bela Lugosi's expressions, and whether or not they told Bela what he was watching, his reactions are quite good, and they fit the scene, and they make it kind of hilarious and amusing. So, like I said, I really like this sequence. It's sort of, for if you like, seeing scantily clad women tying each other up or whatever. But, it's a nice little 1950s thing that really sums up the human sexuality of the period, because this was the time of the pinup model and of Betty Page, and Playboy had not yet become a thing yet, but you had a lot of different glamour models strutting their stuff for the men's magazines and underground magazines. You didn't have one centralized publication quite yet until Hefner came along, and then Hefner had his later competition. But these women just kind of showed up wherever they made their money, and worked for good or bad people depending on the scenario. When you actually learn about some of these people that created the content, they're really not the worst kinds of people you can imagine, and some of the women even actually enjoyed some of the quote-unquote bondage pictures because it gave them something fun to do. That's in the Betty Page movie. If you like the Ed Wood biopic, you might really enjoy the notorious Betty Page. But this is stuff that the models, instead of just laying down for the camera, they get something interesting to do, and they kind of like it. It's theater, it's fun, and it's not as bad as it looks, or at least not the more mainstream images, not the kind of stuff that Betty Page was into, and you don't quite know what effect it had on the public and what people want to do behind closed doors. But for the models themselves, they were having a hell of a time, depending on, of course, the photographer and what was going on, because I'm sure it could get bad also. But these were full-grown adults, models and actresses and people just doing, and you don't even see any nudity in a lot of these. It's just they're even fully clothed a lot of the time, but. Yeah, not sure what the hell is happening here or what this is trying to express. I think the music is still playing over it. I'm not missing any dialogue, but these two are having a little fight, and it's kind of interesting and unusual. It's almost like a Faustian fantasy, and I gotta forgive me for all the devil references. I'm not trying to lead everyone down the wrong way here, but these are similar films that this stuff reminds me of, and like I said, I brought in the comparison to A Nightmare on Elm Street. Ed Wood, every now and then he had an idea that became a bigger idea later with someone else, and it's hard to know whether or not they would have paid attention to him. Now, Wes Craven was in fact a film student of some kind. I forget what college he went to, but he may have had a little bit of knowledge of Ed Wood's films. There's that Lugosi look. I really liked it. Yeah. Okay, so we're back to Ed, and man, Ed is a really great gothic horror actor. His shadowing is quite right. I could watch his expressions all day, and look at how he conveys terror in the old classic way of like a Dwight Fry or a Colin Clive or one of those old leading man actresses from the Universal film era. So, Wood's a little goofy. He has a very poignant New York type of voice. I don't know how to describe it, except it kind of reminds me of an old woman, kind of like Dame Edna. Here we have the return of Conrad Brooks as the homosexual, and all these different people are haunting him and coming into his mind for one reason or another. Maybe these are Wood's former dates or the women that he's obsessed with. His maybe. His womanizing coming to haunt him, and the strange people in his personal life. I like that little extra hand gesture on Conrad Brooks where he tried to do it more like Lugosi. Everyone also flings out their hand, but Conrad just slowly unfurls it. Then, of course, here you have that crazy little devil thing. But here, okay, so they're all ganging up on him, and so Ed becomes Glenda again, or Glen becomes Glenda again in order to thwart them, I believe. This is him explaining to us how Glenda makes him feel comfortable. So when the world is becoming too much, this transvestism, this escape from reality, his facade as a female, as you will, makes him feel very comfortable within himself. And now all these terrorizers are gone. So instead of helping Barbara, he's able to help himself when he becomes Glenda. But he needs to become Glen in order to help Barbara because she needs a man in her life. So this is kind of what Ed is trying to convey. And I wanted to discuss this in the most honest terms because we live in kind of a politically fractious environment where whether one side or the other is going to be condemned. This is like I'm a Republican myself, so I'm not really into a lot of the modern movements and everything, but it's just another time and place that Ed lived, and he made this wonderful movie. So there's like I said, it's almost like Barbara is eluding him. He can't get a hold of her, and he's seeing all these dresses on her, blending seamlessly from shot to shot. It's like, are you attracted to the woman or the dresses or the fetish versus the female and everything? And now she's teasing him and tormenting him like all the others instead of it's kind of a very interesting statement as to how men feel about women. Because you kind of want certain things from them that they don't always provide because they're human just like anyone else. They just happen to be women. So now he's jealous of her and he's ripping off of her clothes because he's Glenda. And I think it's said that, I don't know how his alter ego when he used to dress up as a woman was known as Shirley. And it has been said that Shirley was a little more contemptuous than perhaps Ed. I don't know if that was all true or not, or if it was the alcohol. That's just something I picked up once, that apparently Shirley could be a little bit of a bitch. And this is my favorite. These girls, when they do the little fingers, they love tormenting Ed with the little fingers, and they're walking towards the camera. They're having the time of their life doing that. Here's that little evil demon thing again, and eventually Lugosi's going to pop up and cast out this demon from Ed Wood's life, and unfortunately the demon never totally left Ed Wood's life. He entered into a more of a sexual type of exploitation career that deprived him of his horror gothic legacy, which was more well received. And in fact, Lugosi is largely part of why Wood got out of exploitation films for a brief time, because this movie, which was supposed to be about the Christine Jorgensen operation, segued into like a horror film because Ed had befriended Lugosi and had him available and was able to pay him a little money on it. And so Ed was already in exploitation pictures. I mean, he made literally commercials, and then he started doing some crime noir films. And this was the beginning of his more famous film career. He had a stretch of about 4 or 5 really good films. on top of his more experimental products or things that he had a hand in but not full control over. This film is really one of the best in his catalog because he has 100% control over it. Now, here he is breaking the news to Barbara about who he is and what his thing is about. And later on, they're going to see the psychiatrist portrayed by Timothy Farrell. And I feel like I'm talking too much over this entire film. But like I said, this is my conclusion of the watch along. I'm trying to do it gradually or as best as I can, not so as not to break my computer here. But this was a very fun film for me, and it was one I really always enjoy. It's ridiculous, it's hilarious, it's a little disturbing. I mean, Wood has some very disturbing trends in his film. Now, notice Wood's very interesting hairline, or his parting on his head. He parts his hair clear almost behind his ear. Something very unique. I've not seen it for as many guys. His part goes clear behind his ear. But anyway, this is Dolores, and to say that she's a great actress might be overdoing it, but she was definitely a worthy actress. She was good for Ed Wood, and I think she was good in these films, and this was one of her best parts. I think she could have been even greater in Bride of the Monster had he cast her in there, because it would have been something different. Here is Lugosi as the overseer, presumably absolving Ed Wood of his sins, or perhaps casting him out of his life. I don't know. I can't understand what he's trying to convey there. I'd have to watch the movie again. But here is that famous scene where she hands him the Angora sweater, and Ed, I don't understand, but maybe we can try. And this would have been a really great conclusion of their relationship if it happened this way in real life. But Ed had some serious problems, and the fame and the money really got in the way. I don't think she was that offended about him being a transvestite, but it was kind of a thing. Now you see a little bit of Dolores here. She's a very well-shaped woman, and she kept in really great shape throughout her life. Like miles ahead of some other people, just very fit. And she's got a biography that I still want to read called The Fuller Life. Now we're back to Talbot and Farrell having the discussion here. And, like I said, I can't hear what's going on, so I can't really comment on it. But like I said, I've seen this movie quite a number of times, and I thoroughly enjoy it. And these two are really good actors. No one can say that Ed didn't have good actors, even in the somewhat prime of their life, because he did. I forget the point was that I wanted to revisit, though. Wood's fame became kind of a problem. When he became kind of a big shot, he kind of ruined part of his little community that was developing, and some of the power he had just from being kind of a good guy, which he always, to some degree, he was always a reasonably decent person. But Bride of the Monster, which is going to come up next, it introduced kind of a dark layer to his personal harmony, because then he became a little more about the business and the show business as opposed to maybe his personal life, which was then deteriorating with Dolores Fuller. And that was the last appearance from Dolores Fuller was in Bride of the Monster, which she for some reason was gracious enough to accept that minor part over the major part, where she's just the file clerk, or the secretary. And Wood replaced her with a more professional actress, someone that he found from a casting agency. Supposedly, as legend would have it, depending on who you would believe, and this was originated by Ed Wood, he claimed that Loretta King had actually... and here we're back to the Christine Jorgensen part of the movie, and I forgot what name they call this person that had the operation, but it was, this is the part that more matches to the original intent of the film. So really, you got about 5 or 10 minutes of the quote-unquote Christine Jorgensen story, or barely a mention of her his or her operation. I guess I call her her. I'm not trying to be offended or whatnot, but then you get into Ed for the rest of it. But here you are. I think this is Jorgensen when she was still a man, and uh, they're talking about her going into the Air Force in this case, and then coming back, changing into a woman. And this is some old Army footage that Ed's use of stock is really good here, and you could even use some of that in your own film. It's not a bad habit to learn, particularly for documentaries. And Ed was kind of almost a documentary filmmaker. I think he did do a few documentaries when he did commercials. So this person playing the Christine Jorgensen part, and this is actually, there's a different name for it. It's not exactly Christine Jorgensen, but it's similar. Does a pretty good job. A very effeminate looking man that looks very much like, you could imagine her being a female, like I said, I'm trying to be delicate with these terms because, like I said, I got my own opinion about this that doesn't necessarily gel with the greater community, but it is a thing. It's a very personal experience, and it's something that they have, and I'm just trying to kind of be fair to everybody. But like I said, just more stock footage from the war. I don't know if I'm going to skip over some of this, but it's still really interesting. It kind of sucks when Wood repeats the same shots twice, especially when we're waiting to get somewhere. But, like I said, this is one of my favorite Ed Wood films, and I just felt that he had a really good budget, a really great set of actors, and he wasn't bogged down by too many things, crimping his style, So this was about as good as Wood is ever going to get. He got a little older, a little crazier, and a little more lacking in his assets off and on after this picture. So this picture really gets done a lot of what he had at his disposal. And as I say, with the introduction of the two different narrators, overseers, it's almost like he had more on his available to him than he needed, because he could have just done this movie with Timothy Farrell as opposed to Bela Lugosi. But then you'd miss out on all the really fun spiritual psychedelic. I don't want to say psychedelic. All the fun spiritual stuff, And I forget. I thought there was a part where Lugosi casts out the demon. I didn't remember him just casting out Ed. It's kind of strange when he casts out Ed. I don't know what that's supposed to represent, but I thought that Lugosi would cast out the demon at some point. So maybe I'm remembering this film differently, but there's a lot of fun stuff to experiment with. And pretty soon I think they're going to meet Glen and Barbara, and that they're going to live happily ever after, which just wasn't quite the case with Ed. Ed did, although, eventually find his I don't know if you'd call it his lifetime companion, the woman he stayed with for the rest of his life, which was Kathy Wood, and they seem to have a little bit of a rough, I'd say a hectic relationship, but a loving one, and she continued to have very good memories of Wood. And in fact, everyone who kind of went through Wood has good memories of him. Like, I have great memories just reviewing his different products, and just strange ideas. When I first discovered Ed Wood, Edward D. Wood Jr., I felt him to be a rather dark man. I guess the only film I'd seen was Plan 9 from Outer Space, and I thought it was kind of there was an extra added emphasis on the dead, and even though it was kind of a goofy, I don't want to say even a goofy or silly movie, even though it was a very slipshod production at best. I mean, a troubled production. I don't know. Even if it was a very low budget film that had a lot of production issues, it came off surprisingly dark and disturbing, and there was a lot of legitimately scary things in Plan 9 from Outer Space, which I'm hoping to review in time. We're gonna do a little bit for each video and not too much, so we don't break the computer here. But there he hit on the thing about the zombies before there were zombies. It was something that a lot of other people were similarly toying with, and the idea of a film that was based on true events that actually happened. And in this case, Wood actually did do a film based on similar events that did in fact happen, because Glen or Glenda is in fact biographically based on Ed, and similarly based on Christine Jorgensen. So this is actually a film inspired by true events, which would similarly be a theme later on when he got into his UFOs and his UFO monster horror films, that he thought that, maybe similar to some of the prevailing wisdom I picked up from Christopher Lee in his 100 Years of Horror program, that if you really want to scare someone, just say, you're probably not going to believe what I say. I wouldn't believe it either. But it's true. I know it to be true because it happened to me, and then you can say anything, So that's what Christopher Lee said. Now, here's the overseer with the Christine Jorgensen woman and casting him out, perhaps. I don't know. I don't know what he accomplishes by doing that. Maybe he gets him off of his mind or something. I'm still waiting for him to destroy the demon. I was hoping he would destroy the demon. Oh, so he gets rid of the man, and now he's a woman spiritually. So this is Ed expressing the spiritual transformation of the man into the woman. And we're just going to be very careful about what we say about this, because I'm really not looking for a fight here, but I'm not sure if that's what God would necessarily want, more or less, But this is Wood's movie. This is how he expresses himself, and that's just my little commentary on it. But speaking up for Christine Jorgensen, she lived a relatively comfortable life after the sex change, and I think it's a very real and serious issue. But lately, it has become something of a fad, and I think it can be a little destructive in the wrong hands. You don't. It's one thing to kind of be that way. It's another thing to promote it to others that aren't necessarily like that, if that makes sense. But for people who are like this is one of those outlets that expresses themselves, and it kind of shows a little bit of what they went through and go through. So anyway, I forget. I don't got a whole lot of specs in front of me right now to know exactly who this is. But they're doing a relatively straightforward representation of a more successful sex change operation, which I would agree that Christine Jorgensen was one of the more successful cases. It's, like I said, it's not something I would recommend for everyone, and it's not something I necessarily condone. I'm trying not to condemn or condone, but it is a thing that's been happening, and this is kind of a history of it. And like I said, this ain't my favorite thing, but the pursuit of happiness is a very precious thing in the United States of America, and people trying to figure out who they are and live with it, and so this is going on here. Like I said, it's it's a movie. To me, it's entertainment, but it's also very thought-provoking and intriguing, and it's just stuff I'm interested in. It comes and goes depending on how right or wrong it is. I mean, like I said, a lot of people watch forensic documentaries on brutal murderers and serial killers, and there's a lot of people in the gay community that aren't necessarily murderers or serial killers. So I don't know, but this is the little Glen is going to be all right type of thing, which, like I said, life unfortunately worked out a little different for Ed Wood, and this was him in the prime of his life, looking great, and he had a really great girlfriend here, which in this film was his fiancée. And so, like I said, we're getting to the end, and not sure what to say or how to proceed. But, like I said, as we are coming to the end of Glen or Glenda, I think that might have been the devil guy just now, without makeup. And yeah, right there. Not sure what he's saying. That might give us a little clue or two, but maybe the devil has an alter ego that looks like a human in this case, you know. Um, I'll have to look at the credits again, you know. Like, this is just kind of a fun watch along for me. I don't know if I'm going to keep every part of this commentary intact. We might just take the best of clips and segments and kind of round it out, you know. But like I said, I've really enjoyed studying Ed Wood's life and career, and if I can kind of lend any perspective or appreciation for the man and the artist as he once existed, that's kind of the purpose of this video. And I can't overemphasize how great of an actor Timothy Farrell is in delivering his dialogue. I mean, it might drag on or become a little droll at times, but that was also part of its charm and appeal, as with Ed's documentary format. But look how great of an actor he is with his little hand gestures and his facial movements. And I don't know if this was the way that Ed was in public, because later on he kind of took on the reputation of a hopeless drunk. So even if you knew who he was and said hi to him, he might acknowledge you for a moment, but then he'd kind of go back to being out of it. You know, he still had a lot of ideas. He'd go home and write voraciously. It's hard to imagine him being such a buzzkill when he was such a creative and innovative person. But you know, he was very poverty stricken. You know, trying to make a buck off of business that no longer treated him as well as it used to in his heyday. And really, the Hollywood business never treated Ed Wood very well. But you know, later on, he was I don't want to say he was a nobody. He was just very hard to make a decent living off of the theatrical film, you know. But this was Ed in his heyday, where he was in fact an American filmmaker, and what I would refer to as an American art house pioneer. And like I said, this is a very, very fine film. I really like the Lassie music. I like just about everything about it. And I like Talbot here, you know, and I wish I could hear the dialogue. My version of the film is without audio, so if I watch the one on YouTube, it's a little bit censored. If I watch this one, then it's just me spitballing whatever I can remember of the story. So here's the Overseer with what is more or less the Book of Life. You know, it's like I said, very similar to God, and I'm not the only one to make that comparison. You know, so Lugosi more or less began and ended his career roughly with Role of God, you know, which is really interesting. And the tired old wise figure, you know. But like I said, as far as depictions of God go, I think this is a pretty decent one, you know. A lot of other people can be real disrespectful, and this was really a good-hearted film. I can't say enough good things about the way Ed was trying to convey his personal life in a constructive. Now, if you look at the back of these little credits, there's a nice bunch of little illustrations that you might try to figure out. It's kind of interesting, you know. But it's kind of like I Love Lucy with transvestites, you know. I Love Lucy with Dracula and transvestites. That's what I think of Glen or Glenda. I Love Lucy meets Lassie with Dracula and transvestites, you know. So vaudeville and all this other stuff. So I hope you've enjoyed my commentary on Edward D. Wood Jr.'s Glen or Glenda. I enjoyed watching it over and over again. For me, it's more enjoyable than even the Ed Wood film, but the Ed Wood film was a great starting point for getting me to appreciate different aspects of Ed's life that I wouldn't normally have been able to enjoy before. You know, the production aspect of a film, which, believe it or not, when I was younger, was never really my thing. Like, I just took the movie as is. I didn't necessarily think it was real, but if you kind of broke me out of reality a little bit, it was hard for me to appreciate. It's called kind of what's that word for it? Suspension of disbelief. And when you get older, you lose a lot of that, and it's hard to enjoy a lot of films exactly the same way. But when you let down your hair a little bit with an Edward D. Wood Jr. film, it also keeps some other lesser movies that you may not appreciate alive, because a lot of filmmakers are actually losing the believability skill, the skill of plausibility, and there's more and more films that are just jarring to your common sense. And I think Wood was actually really good at making an enjoyable, entertaining, thought-provoking, historical film that treated so much of its subject matter with great decency and respect. Later on, when he kind of dabbled into, I'd say that Revenge of the Dead, or aka Night of the Ghouls, could have been a little bit silly, and Lon Chaney Jr. In particular, who was loosely in contact with Ed Wood near about that time, he may not like some of the more comedic aspects of it, but Wood would have been searching for a new horror actor to replace Lugosi after he just died, and instead of being able to find like a Carradine or a Lon Chaney Jr., or Boris Karloff for that matter, Ed Wood ultimately settled on a member of his entourage called Kenny Duncan, who was an old Wild West actor, and I think he might have played Emperor Ming in Flash Gordon, and he was known for his little sour face. And Ed Wood shot a trick shot video with him where he does a lot of trick shooting, not really a very great distance, but he shoots a lot of little wooden wafers out of a little trick model and everything. And I thought that was a rather delightful little film. We get to see a lot of the different Ed Wood catalog if you go and visit the Dead to Rights blog with Joe Blevins. And like I said, just it's just a very enjoyable gothic horror adult film noir world is the Ed Wood world, and it was a really interesting time and place at which time the big studios were struggling to capitalize on their horror science fiction franchises. Some of them thought that it was an outdated art form, that everyone has come back from World War II. We're not interested in doing science fiction horror films anymore. Half of the actors are dying. But Ed Wood cornered the market at just the right time when you were kind of like Don Juan, or is it Don Giovanni? Who is it? The one that charges the windmill, Don Quixote. For this brief period in cinematic history, Edward D. Wood Jr. was like Don Quixote charging the windmill. And I don't know how he felt about mainstream Hollywood, if he was always trying to get accepted by them, or if he felt like in competition for them, or if he himself was more or less like a gun for hire, just happy in his little place of the world. But for about 4 or 5 films, Ed Wood had this delightful little entourage where they produced some very unique and unusual films that I think will stand the test of time. And since they're in the public domain, they're part of our overall commonwealth. Anybody can watch them and, just kind of meditate on who they are and what they express. And this is just one more unique and independent view of the life and film career of Edward D. Wood Jr. And I'm just going to recommend my book, Edward D. Wood Jr., American Art House Pioneer. Or however that appears in the title. I think it's called, what is it called? Ed Wood, American Art House Pioneer, by the magnificent Jack Strange, a.k.a. Shenandoah Seth C. This is one of the greatest covers I've ever produced in the history of my own publishing career. It's a self-published book available by Lulu.com currently, and I'm hoping to feature it in more venues and formats. I'm also hoping to do a second book on Edward D. Wood Jr. that'll feature more of my drawings. But, just sit tight and have fun and enjoy that. It's not meant to be the definitive biography of Edward D. Wood Jr., but it just helps appreciate some of the films that I've covered and gone over, and his just a little bit of his life in general. So hopefully you get that and enjoy it. I loved working on this book, and I chose I chose a picture at the very top that reminded me a lot of the closest shot that reminded me of Johnny Depp and Sarah Jessica Parker in the Ed Wood film, because I knew that film was very influential. It was a movie written by Scott Alexander and Larry Karaszewski, if I got that name right. A very difficult to pronounce name that I've only remembered recently for the same reason that it was a very difficult to remember name. But they're doing really great, and they seem to be developing a film with Leonardo DiCaprio as a young Bela Lugosi. And when I say young, I mean a middle-aged Bela Lugosi, probably when he just came to the United States, because I don't think they're gonna be covering his pre-American career, his Hungarian, era career. But it's just when he probably starts becoming Dracula. And I'm sure it'll be quirky and unusual, very similar to the Ed Wood film, and we should celebrate the return of the the return to a similar subject, and what was more or less a prequel to the Tim Burton biopic. And it's a very weird prequel to have in the age of prequels, where for some reason Hollywood is obsessed with prequels. Let's not see where the story goes. Let's see where the story began. We've seen the art of the prequel kind of done, for better or worse, by a number of different filmmakers. There's some ones that are more enjoyable, like Hannibal. I really enjoyed the Hannibal film, Hannibal Rising, and a lot of fun characters to play with and see in and out of their dimensions. And not just you don't want to be too strict with the movies, but you don't want to be too careless either. So I'm hoping that this prequel fad doesn't remain too much of a thing, and some of the sequels have been less than stellar. But I'm losing my voice. I just wanted to give you an update on where we're going and what's ahead. And this Lugosi biopic will also hopefully be a really nice thing for the Lugosi family, which I made a little bit of contact with in production of this book. And I'm hoping that maybe I'll send this to whoever is still alive to enjoy it, because I think Bela Jr. is getting way up there in age, and right now his daughter Lynn, who is the granddaughter of Bela Sr., is more or less in charge of the website, or answers the emails and stuff. And they're very nice people, but like I said, they're just they're up there. And whenever you get to someone that's accomplished something in life, it becomes a little bit intimidating to enter the Hollywood world and everything. But this is my book. I used as much as I could from the public domain, plus my own images. And I just made a very respectful, celebratory book of the life of Edward D. Wood Jr. and all the events surrounding and involved with him. So hopefully you enjoy that, and you've enjoyed this program, and have a wonderful day, and God bless. Thank you.